It's time to clear a path to victory.
It's time to clear a path to victory.
The headsets light up and the TVs show a battlefield with both commanders on their respective sides, along with the number of cards on the table, deck, and destroyed zone. They both draw a card at the same time, and the man whose username on screen was Section placed a card face down and then a Panzer 3J. It then said,
"Your commander who goes first cannot attack first turn, so it's your move."
The boy drew a card and summoned a T-34 heavy battalion and a BM-8 artillery unit for saying,
I sacrifice 3 instant repairs from my tanks in order to use my artillery unit's long-range effect. It allows me to destroy 1 card on your field and allow me to attack again this turn. Eric and I choose your face down for fire.
And Section smirks and said,
"Rookie mistake. Active defense card. Enhanced armament. This card is triggered when targeted. It allows me to sacrifice 1 Panzer unit from my field and add 1 card from my arsenal deck to my hand and play it immediately. My card cannot be negated, targeted, or destroyed. Not by cards with a tier level lower than 7.
And a group were speechless as they watched their friend on screen as he was against the man called Section, and how Sentry knew that their friend would make that action. One of the teenagers stood up and walks over to the table and noticed that the two playing the game and virtually were actually inside of the game itself, but still drawing and placing cards. They walked back to the table and said,
"That looks like a lot of fun."
And the others nodded in agreement until a massive explosion sound made them jump out of their seats. They looked at the TV and saw a chain reaction of explosions of BM-8 artillery trucks exploded from Sentry's Panzer 4 tanks. A life point counter dropped from 100 down to 68 on screen, and their friend covers his face with his arm and said,
Damn it.
He drew a card and immediately puts it and 4 others from the top of his deck into his destroyed zone.
This is bad. It's my last chance to make a move. If I don't get rid of his suspicious betrayal card this turn, I lose.
He looked into his hand, then saw the card. Revolutionary Rebirth. Continue P. He activates it and said,
I activate the revival card known as Revolutionary Rebirth. I can bring back 1 unit from either of our destroyed zones.
Action stood still and motionless, speechless, just staring ahead. A boy shouts,
Don't mock me. I summon Tier 7, Challenger, and I target Suspicious Betrayal or destroy his defense card, Archangel.
A unit of Cold War-era tanks known as Challengers appeared and fired at Suspicious Betrayal. Destroy Section flips over his second card, then said,
I was hoping you'd do that. Now I can activate this. Your Metal Maiden Unison. It allows me to summon as many premium cards that have the name Metal Maiden, bring them on the field as I can, as long as they're from separate nations.
He drew 3 cards from his deck and placed them on the field, and their power and defense were infinite, thanks
to the Metal Maiden Unison's effect, where Sentry targets his opponent's units. And Strauss, destroy the British Challengers, E-34. Destroy the invaders, an M4 Sherman. Surround their commander and wipe out his remaining life points.
After removing his headgear, Section began to gather the cards from his side of the table when the boy shouted,
I have never been sent inside of an actual combat simulation before.
He looked at Section's hand, then noticed that he had 1 card left, and asks him,
Hey, Section, why didn't you use that card against me? Were you going easy on me?
Our Section looks up at the boy, then said to him, Look, kid, I never go easy on my opponents. Truth of the matter is that I simply was unable to use this card against you. That's all.
Section flips the card over, revealing a blue card with the picture of a commander on it and the name Commander Issei. The boy tilts his head in confusion and asks him,
What's its effect, Section?
A brief sigh was released before section said it can only be activated if there is a Panzer division in play. And fortunately for you at the time, I didn't have one in play. You destroyed my last ones with your BM-8s right before I destroyed the last artillery truck, so I couldn't activate Commander Issei after that. It basically stuck in my hand.
The boy looks at him and said,
I had a lot of fun, though. And I think I'm not the only one you've convinced to play your game and to keep coming back here.
and his friends approach section and says,
He's right, you know. Also, we'll spread the word to our friends and teachers.
section stands up and said,
Hold it right there, you four.
they stopped at the doorstep and section says,
You aren't leaving here empty-handed.
he held out 8 decks and says,
2 of each, 1 for each of you, and a choice for 1 friend. However, you are not by any means allowed to keep 1 for yourselves or give another if you or someone else already owns 1, until after I open shop on the 3rd. This is a trading card game, but not yet official. Got it?
4 days later, section opens his gaming cafe and a massive line quickly emerges outside. As he began to sit people down and sell cards to find an adult holding a deck box approached him and asks,
Your name is Section, correct? One of my students told me of his experience here, and I wanted to see for myself if what he told me was accurate.
Section looks at the deck box in the woman's hands before he said,
Your Soviet siege deck. Then I'll use the Battle of Berlin deck. Please follow me.
Section leads her to an empty playing table and says,
I'm sure your student has already explained how this table works, Mom.
she placed her deck down and puts the headset on. Then section nods and turns on the TV before saying,
And now for the pledge.
she nods and the two shout.
It's time to clear a path for victory.
Section and the teacher both appear on screen, and section says,
Since you're using a Soviet siege deck, you go first.
fine. She drew 4 cards and placed down a BT-5 and a BT-7 unit then.
Since I went first, I cannot attack this turn. So go ahead, Section.
He drew a card and grinned before saying,
Or place 2 cards face down and 1 in hidden defense. Then I'll end my turn.
she grit her teeth and drew a card before thinking to herself,
Hidden defense. If what grandfather told me is right, Nazi tank destroyers hid from the enemies on the battlefield. But what I don't get is why he would put it in defense. Is it because I outnumber him? Or is it something...
She looked up at Section, who was smirking with his arms folded. She switched her BT-7s to defense.
I'll activate the field spell. Stalingrad.
Section flipped over a counter trap and said,
I active the trap card Field Marshal. This card decides which command it's to make any action this turn, depending on who has higher powered unit total in play.
Our teacher shouts.
Why do that? It's obviously me.
Section looks at her with a calm face, then asks her,
You sure about that? Your total goes up to 1,700, while mine is
and he flips over his hidden card, a Jaguar, and said,
2,000. If you look back on history, this tank actually was more dangerous than the Panther by armor development, just not firepower. Also, it was great at keeping hidden from its enemies. That's why one of its effects is hidden defense. Whenever I place this card on defense, it remains hidden until I choose to change its position, or for my choice. I'll cancel your card's activation and choose to draw any one card from my deck.
Section picks up his deck and chooses a random blue card and places his deck back down before sending Field Marshal to the destroyed zone, and sets down another card before saying,
I activate Suspicious Betrayal. At the beginning of each one of your turns, you must discard the card you draw and 3 top cards from your deck to the banished zone. Then I switch my Jaguar back to hidden defense and I end my turn.
As the two battled, the same group from before walked into the building and felt just how tense it was. And as their history teacher was battling Section from the TV, one of them said,
Whoa, this fight must be intense if everyone here has their attention so fixated on them.
One of the others said,
Well, we did warn her not to battle, Section.
Let's order the usual and just watch from our usual spot.
They walked to their reserved table and ordered a multi-layered ice cream sundae and 5 glasses of orange juice and watched the intense battle go on. And the teacher drew a card and placed it, and another 3 into her banished zone before looking at her hand.
There's nothing else I can do anymore. You've won this battle, Section. I surrender.
On the screen showed Section once again and said, Winner. On it, before returning them to their reality. Next Section and the teacher lift their headset and place them on the table before shaking each other's hands and smiling like professional commanders. And for a moment, everyone thought they saw the virtual commanders in person shaking hands. And Section said,
You fought with great honor.
the teacher replied, saying.
And you fought with great valor, comrade.
As they saluted each other, the customers clapped in cheers for the two combatants, and Section takes off his military cap before asking the teacher,
Ma'am, I couldn't help but notice your caution when I played my cards during our battle. Correct me if I'm wrong, but perhaps you were a staff sergeant who was exiled from the army? She looked at him in shock and then said,
That's right. But now I'm a history teacher that still only craves more battle.
Section puts his hat on, then said,
If you truly desire more combat, you can work here with me in this department. You'll get endless battles and tons of fun, make new friends, and still be able to teach in the process. Not to mention the pay is 10 times more than a school's yearly paycheck.
She looked down, and Section says,
I won't force it on you. The choice is entirely yours to make.
And with that, Section walks over to the group of kids he saw before and asked,
Do you want to play Path to Victory with me?
One of them smiled and said,
Sorry, Section, we didn't bring our decks. We're just here for the cafe and to watch others play for today.
Section smiled and says,
I get that. How about your ice cream? Are you enjoying it?
They smiled and said,
You sell the best in the city by far.
Section smiled again, then says,
I'm glad you enjoy the food here so much. I've prepared a care package for you four whenever you finish up here. Just come and see me, but not if I'm in battle, okay?
They saluted and said,
Yes, sir. After several hours of battling, selling cards and food, Section was shutting off the tables to Path to Victory when the history teacher re-enters the shop and said, I thought about your offer. Section plugs a wire back in the table, then asks her, I knew you'd come back. What's your answer? She looks at him with a solid face, then saluted and said,
Staff Sergeant Gina Millar, ready for service commander. Section sighs and says, So you figured me out that fast, did you? She smiles and said, There has been a rumor going around military veterans that have been here and played your game. Their PTSD hasn't been triggered even once playing your game. Path to Victory.
Section smiles and says,
I'm glad to hear that. Even Path to Victory has made its way into the hearts of veterans and active duty troops without causing them problems. Do you really think you'll be able to handle working here, Gina?
She hugs Section, then said,
It's not just me who wants to work here. You know,
and Section backs away and asks her,
How many more are we talking about, Gina?
She held up 2 fingers and said,
My 2 boys. They've been playing your game against each other at home and high school since you first opened.
Section sternly tells Gina,
I will only allow it if one works the shop and the other helps out in the left Path to Victory table side, and they switch during break times.
She nods and said,
I'll be sure to tell them.
Section adds,
Slacking will be a deduction of pay.
Gina once again salutes before walking outside. Early the next morning, Section was unlocking the doors to his gaming cafe when he heard footsteps from behind.
Morning, boss.
Section opened the door and said,
It's too damn early to be yelling like that. Anyways, good morning.
Gina walks in and saw Section, then asks him,
Section, were you up late drinking last night?
He swallowed some water, then said,
Nope, just water. I was making more cards. We were requested commissions by some contractors of a rival card game company or send them a card that they would deem as made for the game.
One of the boys steps forward and asks, Could you just leave that to me? I'll have it done by your lunch break. Section nods and said, Sure thing. If we succeed, I'll double all 3 of your pays. The deadline is by closing time today. The 2 boys ran to the back of the store and Gina asked Section, Is that why you were drinking? Section shook his head, then said, I wasn't drinking. I'm just ill from overworking. Gina felt his forehead, then said, You really shouldn't be working today, Commander. Let's get you home. And Section looked at her, then asks, What about you 3? Gina smiled and said, We can handle today ourselves. You need to stay in bed and recover. Section pulls out a card from his back pocket and said, It's the best card in Path to Victory. Just by drawing it wins you the game. Gina looks at it and said, It's called Path to Victory. Why not send this off to the company you spoke of? Section was passing out, but managed to say, It's the heart of the game. It's irreplicable. Gina called EMS after Section collapsed, and she returned to the gaming cafe after explaining what happened to the first responders. Later that day, she got a phone call from the hospital saying that Section was going to be okay, but needed to stay for a while due to having a stroke and extremely low blood pressure. And she thanked them and hung up before announcing that, after all battles are finished, the gaming cafe is closing early due to a serious emergency involving Section. Everyone quickly finished and politely wished Section to get well soon. After the store was empty, Gina and her 2 boys locked up and drove to the hospital section was at Ly, but only to see that his health was rapidly declining and he was put on life support. Suddenly many military Humvees and transport vehicles parked outside the hospital, and they entered it to visit the one
It's time
man
to
who had
clear a
brought them
path to
peace and
victory.
joy when they needed it most. As he was on his deathbed, suddenly 2 men in suits and the president walked beside section, and he looked down at the man, then said, "This man brought all of us something precious when we thought we had nothing anymore. He is a hero among hero and man worthy of acknowledgement from us all." And section grabbed the president's wrist, and with what little strength he had left, he placed a note in his hand before his heart went into cardiac arrest. The president opened the note and reads it to himself, clenching it furiously, and he said, "Staff Sergeant Gina Millard, he's put you in charge of his shop. Make it great like he did." She saluted, and the president said, "This was no mere accident. Get the police and FBI to search his home. I want to know exactly how many cards he made in one night, and the contents of every beverage he drank overnight." The next morning, results were in and not looking good. He made over 1,700 cards, 20 waters, no substances.
It's time to clear a
but there
path
was
to
one
victory.
suspicious thing. Inside of the ink for the card maker, we discovered a deadly toxin that poisons you if it's inhaled over a certain period of time and leaves no visible evidence afterwards. Commander Section was murdered with toxic poison over a period of time. A national hero to those who served and those who still serve. We will always cherish what he gave us.
The power to find the path to victory.